welcome to Why We Are Christians. My name is Kent Philpott, pastor of Miller Avenue Baptist Church, Mill Valley, California. But up north, I think Kent, Washington, isn't it, Kevin?
Yes.
Kent,
yes.
Washington is a gentleman named Kevin Sherfey. And
Yes.
some time ago, I remember I interviewed your brother Ranley. Great to have you. Get to have you, Kevin. And so we're just going to tell the story. And I look down here and I see you were born in Long Island, New York.
Yes. I was a baby then. I can't remember it, but that's what they tell me. Yes.
And your ancestry arrived in America prior to the Revolution.
Yes. Quite a story. Yes.
Where did they come from?
Well, they came from, it's hard to know, England, Germany, Amsterdam, before they were fleeing persecution during the Reformation period.
Okay.
They were a group called the Dunkers, and they fled to America eventually.
Now, Dunkers gives me a clue because the Dunkers, that was the German name for Baptist.
Yes.
So maybe they came from Germany, Kevin. I don't know, but that's my association. You know, that's the way it was. And so now, tell us a little bit about your growing up. You have brothers, sisters, what?
Yeah, a family of 5 sons. 4 of us born with less than a year apart. I have a brother 10 months older, one 11 months younger, and then the oldest was a year and 10 months older than I am.
Okay.
So we were all like twins. I mean, we were all like whatever. And then Ranley, you've met him. He came along 3 years later.
Okay.
So we were all very close. As I mentioned, I had the most wonderful childhood. Growing up with brothers that close, no girls in the family. We were just had a wonderful time of growing up. We lived in an area where I could be in the fields and in the creeks, and just perfect for a bunch of little boys.
Okay.
But we really had a great time.
All right, Kevin. Now, you say that you were raised in Danville, California.
Yes, Danville, California. Beautiful place.
Okay. Yeah, I've heard of it. Where is that located?
It's in the Bay Area,
Yeah.
right outside of, right next to Walnut Creek.
Okay.
That area.
Okay. Well, that's kind of important because you're going to be involved, and one of the reasons why you're on here is because you have a great connection with the Jesus People movement. Kevin, we'll talk a little bit more about that, particularly toward the end of this program. But what I like to do is give people an idea who you are. Did you go to any kind of church with your parents there in Danville?
Kind of not. We did frequent a little Baptist church occasionally.
Okay.
But we were so young and we went so not very often. So there were times where we did go for, consecutive weeks, but then we wouldn't for a long time, and then we'd go back. My mother was a devout Christian, and she was raised Baptist, and she wanted to go to Baptist church. And there, in that area we lived in, there were hardly any Baptist churches. It was mostly Catholic, and so we ended up they're having meetings in City Hall or rented a little building, and that's the kind of church we would go to when we went. You wouldn't even think of it really as a church.
Okay. So you've told us a little bit about your family. Can you talk to us a little bit, Kevin, a little bit about how you became a Christian?
That's a kind of a little bit. That's a kind of a hard, long story. But when I was very young, at one of these meetings I was talking about my parents would go to, I was probably extremely young. I'm not even sure how old I was. but there was an evangelist that came to town, and he preached on Christ being crucified and how he died for us. I'm not sure why he had to die for us or anything like that, but it touched my heart that he did die for me. And so at the altar call, I responded. And I believed I was a Christian. I believed I was saved. I was really happy. And what happened was they baptized me, I think, the next week.
How old were you?
I don't know how old I was. Very young. But I can't even tell you how old I was. Very young. And so young that I was, after they baptized me, I was in the parking lot with the women. And I think I was standing with a group of women, and they all had those blousy skirts in those days. And I think I was lost in the ruffle of skirts, and they didn't know I was there. and I heard one lady say, wasn't it wonderful, Kevy went forward and got baptized, but we know he's not really saved. One day he will be when he's old enough. That crushed me. And my mom didn't object to it. And she was standing right there. And so I just believed them that I wasn't really saved. So I would say this is a time in my life when I was saved, but not really. So the rest of my growing up period of life up through high school would be with the secret I held. I never shared it with anybody. A secret that Jesus loves everyone else but me. He'll save everyone else but me. And I'm waiting for him to save me. And I'm listening to all the stories of people, how they got saved. And I'm waiting for it to happen to me. And it never does. And so it wasn't until after much rowdy living, much difficulties in my life, that I would actually come to believe he saved me.
Okay. Do you remember how old you were at that point, Kevin?
No. But while I was in high school, I was getting really wild. I was getting really crazy. And I remember my mother pulled me aside one day. She saw I was getting crazy. And she got me on my knees. And she said to me, Kevin, I want you before God to promise me something. And she said, I want you to promise me you'll never take drugs. And I said, okay, fine, just to get up. I said, okay, I'll never take drugs. And she let me go. But that stuck with me. And through all my wildness and craziness, that really saved my life. Because I will have friends that have died with drugs, and the whole world seemed to got involved with drugs at that time.
Yeah. What years were those? Was that?
That would be I was to graduate in 1970. So this was somewhere in the my early years of high school. I was probably a junior or a sophomore.
So we're talking about the latter 60s, 68, 69.
The latter 60s. And my parents, like I said, I had a wonderful childhood, but then my mother got cancer. And things drastically changed. She wasn't able to watch out for us kids, and we kind of got wild. And my dad couldn't care for us. And so before she could get back on her feet and get situated, it was very serious cancer, but she lived through it. We had missed enough school. We had gotten behind, so now we were just kind of, our goal was to just have fun in life. And I think all my brothers were kind of like that. Maybe Ranley was spared that. He was a little younger. But then what happened was my father, who was well-to-do, but after she got cancer, his financial situation started going bad. And he'll lose eventually everything. Everything he owns, he'll lose. And we go from riches to rags during my high school.
Wow. I read that in the thing that you sent me, Kevin. I read that and I thought, I've got to really ask him about that. I'm glad you brought it out because it didn't make any sense. All of a sudden, your parents had nothing.
Had nothing. My father was a developer, a real estate developer, and it was either boom or bust. And he had one big thing he was going to make, enough to live off the rest of his life. And he invested all of his money in it. And everything went wrong from then on out. He had fighting with zoning, fighting with corrupt investors, partners. People took the money and fled to island countries. And he eventually, after going through our high school years, he eventually ends up on the street, homeless. But in my junior year, just to tell you how bad it was, I went off and spent the summer away out in the park, out in the mountains with a friend. And when I came back the summer of my junior year, somebody else lived in my house. And my family was gone. And I had no idea where they were.
Wow.
So I was homeless at that point. And what happened was, eventually I found out they had moved to San Clemente, California. But I was going to stay in Danville to try to graduate because I only had a year more. And so I was homeless for a year, just drifting from one friend to another. No money, no anything. I almost graduated. I almost did it, but I failed at the very end. And so that's when God started really dealing with me.
So you're 17, 18 years old now.
Yes. And all this time, I remember getting on my knees at one point in my senior year, because it wasn't innocent fun anymore. Now it was becoming dark. Drugs was coming in, and it was just becoming less innocent fun. It was things were beginning dark. And so I remember I got on my knees and I said to the Lord, Lord, if you would just save me, I wouldn't have to do these bad things anymore. And I just wait. I wait and nothing would happen. So I'd get up and say, okay, I guess I don't have a choice. And I didn't. I'm homeless. I mean, I can't desert my only friends who are taking care of me. I didn't know how to be good. So I felt like I had to do bad to have a life. It's hard to explain, but I didn't know how anything but to be bad. So during this time, I really wanted to be saved, and it just wouldn't happen. And at that point, I remember I was witness to. Somebody almost hit me with a car crossing the street. And then I go into a restaurant and they come running in going, oh, we're so sorry, we almost killed you. And I said, it's quite all right. I'm alive. And they said, well, we just have to know. If we would have killed you, would you have gone to heaven or hell?
Wow.
And and
What
I
a
said, I would
story.
have gone to hell. I'm sure of it. And they looked at me and said, well, don't you believe in Jesus? And I said, of course I believe in Jesus. And they said, you believe in Jesus and you're going to hell? And I said, I'm sure of it. And they said, you poor soul. And I said, tell me about it. And they walked out shaking their heads like I was a hopeless case. That's the first time I was witness to. And that's my senior year in high school. And a couple of weeks before high school is over, I knew I wasn't going to graduate. And what happened was there was two more of us, a guy by the name of Mark and Ron, and we were the down and outers of the whole town. I mean, we were the ones we outdid everyone else in being foolish. And we decided, since none of us were not going to graduate, let's just start summer early. So we dropped out of school with about 2 weeks to go, senior year, and headed out on the road hitchhiking. And I think it was the first night. We're in Sacramento, and some guy picks us up, and he takes us home to have a party. And he says we can spend the night. And so that's what we're doing. And he starts talking about Jesus in a bad way.
In a what? In a what way?
Bad way.
A bad way?
Criticizing Jesus and Christians. See, what was going on was the Jesus movement had already begun, and we didn't know it. But we were running in. Now we're going to be running into people talking about Jesus all the time. And so this guy goes on, he's bad-mouthing Christians, and I stop him and I say, listen, I know you're putting us up. I don't want to be rude, but you're wrong about Jesus. He's a good man. He's the Son of God. He died for our sins, and he loves us. And he looked at me and he said, it's obvious you're not a Christian. So why are you saying this? And I looked at him and I said, listen, it's not about me. It's about Jesus. He's the good person. I'm not. He got real frustrated. I thought he was going to kick us out of his house, but he let us spend the night. But my friends were looking at me, and I remember them giving me that look like, Kevin, we've never heard this from you. What's going on? And the next day, he took us back to where we were hitchhiking, and somebody had scribbled on the entrance sign to the freeway where we were hitchhiking, Jesus loves you. And after I just had that episode with him, the first time I've ever witnessed for Christ, and it just hit my heart. And I just said, okay, Jesus loves me. Yeah. We were headed for the mountains. We were going to be hippies and spend the time in the mountains. Eventually, we got picked up by the squarest person you've ever met. He had slacks and polished shoes and parted his hair on the side. Everything that wasn't cool in those days. He was the epitome of not cool. And we're in his car. It's an old junker, and we're in his car. And he starts sharing about Jesus with us. And something I never experienced before. The presence of God filled that car so strongly. It was almost physical. You could feel it that much. And my friends look up at me. They were laying down in the back and trying to recover from the night before. And they were looking up at me. They felt the presence of God, and I felt the presence of God. And this guy was oblivious to it. And he was just going on about how much Jesus loved him and forgave him and how he got saved. And how he was such a terrible sinner, that he actually sinned so bad and God forgave him. And we're looking at him thinking, this guy must have been a murderer. He must have killed somebody. And he finally let the secret out, what he had been forgiven of. He had smoked a cigarette. And we just thought, but it was so sincere. And God's presence was so real, we weren't laughing about it. We were shamed. We felt shameful. And he told us about a festival that was coming into we dropped us off in this town. And he said, there's a Jesus festival coming in a month. And you guys ought to make it if you can. And so he dropped us off, and we sat there and wouldn't even talk to each other for about 10 minutes. Couldn't even look each other in the face because we're all so convicted. Finally, Mark said, I'm not leaving here until the festival comes. It's a month away.
Kevin, where was this at?
I don't even know. Some town on the way up Yuba River, Yuba Valley, Grass Valley area of California.
Okay.
And we don't know where we're going and what we're doing. We're just hitchhiking, living the crazy life. And so we're going to stay there. We're already far enough out of the Bay Area. There's a different feeling towards hippies. We're finding out that people don't like hippies in this area. So we're going to run into trouble everywhere we go. We decide we're going to stay there a month and wait for the Jesus festival. But as we decided that, just a few minutes later, a police pulls up and says, if you guys aren't out of here within an hour, I'm going to arrest you. For what? I have no idea. Just for being hippies, I guess. And so we had to move on. And we would experience that over and over on this trip. We actually came to a town. I remember this little town up in the mountains. It was so picturesque. It had wooden sidewalks. It looked like something you see on a cowboy movie. But it was a real town. And we were so hungry, hadn't eaten in days. We had a few nickels and dimes, and we bought 3 potatoes. And we sat there in front of the general store eating raw potatoes.
What a story, Kevin. Raw potatoes.
That's how hungry we were. And I remember across the street, as we ate those potatoes, this lovely lady with about a whole flock of kids around her. And she's looking at us and staring at us. And she sends one of her kids over to me. And the little boy says, my mom says she doesn't like hippies, but she doesn't like anyone to starve. And he handed us $1 and ran back to his mom. And I looked at the mom, and she could hardly look at me. She turned away, but she was a sweet lady. And so we would meet awful people and nice people. And so we had $1. We bought some sweet rolls that held us off for a while. This whole trip was nothing but a hunger. That's what I remember. We were so hungry all the time. But as we're in that town and it's so picturesque, the mayor, he comes up to us and says, you see that bridge, fellas? I mean, yeah. And he said, well, I can guarantee your safety until sundown. The last hippie that tried to spend the night here, we found him hanging from that bridge the next morning.
Wow.
So we said, okay, we got the message. And off we go. And we spend a number of weeks trying to live off the lands, as we used to call it. It meant that we were trying to meet other campers and try to get food from them. But that was our whole goal, our aim in life at that point was to get something to eat. We were really starving. So anyway, after a few weeks of this, we decided to come back to civilization. and we hitchhiked down. We come back to Walnut Creek. We're just in time for the weekend when they cruised the creek. It was a big thing. All the kids would come together and walk the strip, and it would just pack out with young kids, and the cars would go up and down the strip, and they would call it Cruising Creek. And there we felt at home, that we were raised experiencing this. So we felt at home when now we were in Creek. And who do we meet on the sidewalk? Larry Gottlieb. And he's
what?
Larry Gottlieb.
Did you just say Larry Gottlieb?
Yes.
I've interviewed Larry on this program while we were Christians. Larry and I are good friends. He was at one of our Christian houses in San Anselmo, Baraka House, when he was 17 years old, Larry Gottlieb. I talked to him every other week on the phone.
Well, he was there and handing out tracts and talking to people about Jesus. And he talked to us. We were interested, but there were too many girls around, so we were interested in that too. So we met some girls that evening, and we cruised the creek with them. And they could see we were hungry. And so they said, why don't we take you home and feed you? And we said, that'd be wonderful. We got steaks. We'll cook you some steaks. That was like heaven to us. So we go, wow. So they take us to their house, and they say, oh, no, our parents are home. We can't feed you after all, but we'll run in and get you the steaks. So they did. They ran in and got us, and they brought out these bloody steaks. And they handed us these bloody steaks. And so then they said, where are you going to cook them? We said, we don't know, but we'll find somewhere. And they said, we know where there's a party. Would you like to go to a party? And we go, yeah, that's just our style. So they laughed and took us to this party. And what happened was they left off saying, have a good time at the party, laughing their heads off. And we just thought they were weird girls, you know. We had 3 bloody steaks and a gallon of wine. And we burst through those doors like we're going to be the belle of the ball. And we end up standing in the middle of the living room with nothing but a bunch of people standing there with the Bibles open.
Now, Kevin, I got to stop you because we got 12 seconds left on this program. I'm going to have to say goodbye, and we're going to pick this story up in our next segment of why we are Christians. So, okay, Kevin Sherfey, we're going to be finishing up on this crazy story he's got to tell. So you be looking for the next program on why we are Christians. So long.